Learn how to play Machina Arcana. Come on back after the break. Hey everybody, welcome out to the show, Board Game Reviews. This is a YouTube channel dedicated to the tabletop gaming hobby, and this video is part of a video series looking at the game Machina Arcana. Now in this video I'm actually going to teach you how to play the game, but I'm going to keep this kind of quick and kind of concise because I don't want this to be like my Arkham Horror video, which was about an hour and a half just to learn how to play the game. Now the game isn't that hard to learn, but there are a little bit of exceptions. I'm going to try and make this as quick as possible. We're going to go through setup, how to play the turns, and then basically how to win the game. Now if you enjoy this video, if you enjoy the video series, make sure you click that like button, click that subscribe button, and also feel free to email me at authorshopboardgamereviews. That is otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll do my best to answer your email as quick as I can. If you enjoy the content and you enjoy the videos I put out there, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. Just $1 in the tip jar over on Patreon can help me cover my costs and help keep the content coming out there strong. Now remember, this channel is 100% sponsor free, so your subscriptions and your support definitely matter. You can help it keep the lights on, help keep on future content coming out for this channel on a constant basis. And don't forget, if you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I will definitely get to them as quickly as I can. But that's enough of the preamble. Let's go ahead and get into Machina Arcana with the very first thing, which is going to be the setup. For further setup, the first thing we need to do is we need to figure out which mission we are going to go on. I'm going to explain how to play the game using Horror in the Ice. Now remember, the base box does come with 3 scenarios, and each one of the expansions also comes with 2 scenarios apiece, and each one of the expansions also adds in additional rules. So if you're expecting to hop into the expansions from this video, you might be a little bit lost because there's going to be an extra rule sheet for every one of those videos or for every one of those expansions, and I'm not going to cover those in this video. So the first thing you need to do is figure out which expansion or which mission you're going to play through. Again, Horror in the Ice, and you're going to notice there's a symbol on the back of every one of these. This is very important because we want to get the scenario-specific cards that are also going to match that. We're going to have the scenario-specific cards for the event deck, and we're going to have the scenario-specific cards for the regular event deck. We basically have our heroic events and our horror event here, and we're going to see the symbol matches in the upper right-hand corner, which matches the symbol in the back. Additionally, some of the scenarios, especially in the base box, all the 3 scenarios for the base box do come with their own scenario-specific final endgame tile. Now this is going to be the endgame tile that you're going to encounter, and when you have the endgame, it's going to tell you to bring this specific tile into play. So make sure you're not shuffling the scenario-specific tiles when you're shuffling up the scenario tile stack, because you're going to mess things up. Again, these are all individually marked with a scenario-specific symbol on the back. Again, since we're doing Horror in the Ice, that is going to be a snowflake. After we separate out the scenario-specific chapter boards for the specific scenario and make sure we shuffle up the remaining chapter boards themselves, there should be a total of 10 of them. So we're going to remove the 3 specific chapter boards. The next thing we need to do is make sure that we get the board set up correctly. This is going to be a chapter board where we're going to tell our story. And again, we're going to have the Horror in the Ice adventure. The first thing we need to do is make sure that we remove the end game card. Now, some of these scenarios may have more than one end game, so make sure you go through an entire stack of chapter cards and remove any and all of the end game cards. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to add all these onto the chapter board. Now make sure you don't shuffle these. These need to remain sequential from number 1 all the way up to depending on however many chapters may be in there. Now I'm not going to cover this in this instructional video, but in the rulebook there are some specific variants in the game that do teach you how to play the game as a faster variant of the game where you're going to remove certain chapters. So go and check that out in the rulebook. It's going to tell you to take out a certain amount of chapters. You still get to play the entire scenario, but it's going to play out quicker because you have less scenarios to go through. But the basic idea is once we add these chapter cards onto our board, we are going to flip over the top one, and this is going to give us some thematic artwork. Additionally, we're going to see chapter number 1, again, the matching symbol for the current scenario that we're playing. It's also going to give us our spawn rating and our horror rating. We need to make sure that we set those immediately at the start of the scenario. And the interesting thing is every time we advance in the chapters, you're going to see that sometimes these numbers may change. They do change at the start of every scenario. Once we advance into that chapter, we must make sure we change these numbers to always match whatever that happens to be. Now, as the current chapter plays out, these numbers may change, but at the start of every single new chapter, we must immediately reset these numbers to whatever they happen to be, and as we play out the chapter, then they may adjust to the actions of our heroes. But since we're doing setup right now, let's go ahead and start everything up with a spawn rating of 7 and a current horror rating of 4. Next thing we need to do is we need to take the horror event cards and the horror event deck, and the heroic events and the specific events for this scenario, and we're going to shuffle these 2 decks together. Now the bluer ones, this is going to be for the heroic events, and then the redder one's going to be for the horror events. Again, the next thing we need to do is just take the final end game event, and we're going to put this off to the side, put it face down so we don't get to read it, because we want that to be a surprise, so we figure out exactly what our final enemy happens to be for this scenario. Next up, every single player needs to choose and explore. Now this is a 1 to 4 player game, And this is a true 1 to 4 player game, so if you want to play this game solo, you can make sure you play through the game playing with one hero only. You're not required to play as a 1 player game with multiple explorers. Again, you pick 1 explorer if that's what you want to do. The game is fully balanced for that. Plays from 1 to 4 players. But the important thing is that every single player needs to pick the explorer that they want to play. Now, there are multiple explorers that come with the base set, plus each expansion adds in additional explorers, and every single player needs to take an explorer board and the 3 matching symbols that go with their explorer board. Now, the main purpose of these tokens right here are for special abilities, and every single one of our explorers may have a special ability. And basically what's going to happen is if they have a special ability such as this one says we're going to reduce the range of our target, that basically means if we hit a target, well, I'll explain that doesn't really mean hit, but I'll explain that later. But we're going to take one of these tokens and apply it on top of our target, put it on top of the card to signify as a reminder that our special effect is currently active on that specific target that we hit. Next thing we do is we look at all the specific stats for all of our heroes. We're going to have our armor, we're going to have our mind, we're going to have our maximum amount of essence. Again, this is our maximum. This is our maximum amount of hit points, and this is our maximum amount of stamina. Now, I want to emphasize maximums because the important thing that we're going to learn right here is even though our maximum essence is 5, we always start with 0 essence, unless the chapter tells us otherwise. The maximum amount of stamina is how much we will actually start the scenario with. Health. And then the maximum amount of stamina is how we're also going to start the scenario. For example, if we decide as a player to control Jesse Monroe, we're going to see that we have a special ability that costs us 2 stamina. It has a range of 3. When we attack with this ability, it's going to tell us to roll 1 of the white dice. There's 2 kinds of dice that come in the game for attacking. You have white dice and black dice. If it's a white square, it's a white die. If it's a black square, it is going to be a black die. There's also the recharge die. I will explain that later. And then finally, we get the arcane die, which basically makes our life difficult, which is going to control the spawns. It's also going to control the horror rating and special abilities. It's basically a D10. The game tells you to roll a D10. Yep, that's the die you're going to roll. But the basic understanding here is this is the biggest thing you need to understand about the rules for Machina Arcana is meets beats. So if something tells you need to roll a 4 or higher, for example, to hit this guy, I need to roll a 3 or higher as an enemy. Since I have an armor of 3, any total of dice for an attack dice, if it's 3 or higher, is going to hit. If I get hit by an arcane attack, it's going to be my mind that's going to resist it. And all the attacks in the game are going to be physical versus armor unless they specify the arcane. If they specify the arcane, the target number is going to be the target's current mind attribute. So some of the attacks based on arcane ability, if it gets at least 2 successes, and successes are counted on the dice. If I roll the dice right here, I have 1, 2 successes. So this was an arcane attack versus me. And meet or beat my arcane total, so that would be a hit. I'd suffer the damage. And all damage in this game, unless specified otherwise, is going to be 1 point damage. Even if I get hit by some supremely overpowered attack, which is going to attack me with 5 dice total, even though my arcane mind is only 2 and I get a total here of 5, I'm still only going to take 1 point of damage. Doesn't matter how much you beat the target number, it's always going to be 1 point of damage. Unless scenario specific, and yes, there are scenarios where you're going to take 2 points of damage, and yes, there are some weapons that also break that rule. Just understand it's very, very important. Again, your maximum essence means that it can never go past 5, but again, every scenario you start with 0. Your current hit points, if your hit points reach 0, you are dead. There is player elimination in this game. If you die, you're out of the game. The first player to go out of the game is going to start controlling all the enemy AI. At that point, the monsters are controlled by a player. They're no longer going to respond to a generic AI. That player is going to make all the decisions and strive to kill the other players with the best of their abilities. The second player is knocked out is also going to help and join the enemy side. And finally, in a 4-player game, the third player knocked out is also going to generally join the enemy side. They're going to work together to try to kill off that last remaining explorer. And then finally, we have our stamina statistic. Now, stamina is basically going to be used to perform all our actions. Every single action we take in the game is going to use up stamina, whether it's attacking something, moving something, exploring the board, interacting with the board, interacting with different objects. Everything takes stamina. It's basically anywhere from 1 to possibly 4 stamina. I'll avoid spoilers. That's not always how it is, but generally speaking, you'll spend the stamina. If you have enough stamina, you'll spend it. If you don't have enough stamina, you can't perform that ability. For example, if you only have 2 stamina left over and you want to take an action that takes 3 stamina, well, you're out of luck. You can't do that action. Find something else to do. Next thing you want to do is make sure you shuffle up every individual item deck completely separately. And I'm going to explain these cards in just a second, but the important thing to understand is they need to be shuffled up separately. You have your items, you have your apparel, you have your artifacts, and then you have your consumables right over here. Now, just go ahead and break these down a little bit by showing a couple different examples. For example, this is going to be an item that's a weapon. This is going to be an item which is an augment. I'll explain how that works in just a second. This is going to be an armor, which is a standard body armor, and this is going to be a helmet, and I'll show you how these can augment each other in just a second. We have artifacts, and then we finally have consumables. Now, the important thing about consumables, understand, I'll just cover them extremely quickly right here, is they do not need to be equipped to go ahead and use. And basically, you're going to use these consumables, they're going to have a special effect, and then you're going to discard them. For example, this one says at a range, or I'm sorry, cost of stamina 1, range of 6, destroy this card, which means basically remove it from the game. And the important thing to understand about this game is when it comes to all 4 of the item decks, you have one community discard pile. You're not going to discard individual decks for their own discard piles. When I discard any one of these cards, they're going to go into one community discard pile. It's a very important thing to understand. Plus, there's a couple different segue rules, but just understand the basic ideas. When you discard everything, it all goes to the same discard pile. But the important thing to understand is that every single one of these cards is going to have a level on it. That's going to be upper left-hand corner. This is level 1 item, level 1 consumable, level 1 artifact, level 1 apparel. Level 1 apparel is going to be a level 1 augment, and this is going to be a level 1 weapon right here. Now, at the start of the game, we're going to start with only level 1 items in every one of our 4 decks. As the chapters go on, they're going to specify when you're going to shuffle in the level 2 and finally level 3 items into those decks. Now, when you shuffle in the level 2 and level 3s, we're going to shuffle them into the current deck. We're not going to take our current active discard pile and shuffle those back into the decks. Once a card has gone into the discard pile for the 4 different items, they're basically removed from the game unless an artifact or a special ability brings them back into the game. And yes, those do exist, but they're very few and very far between. So the interesting thing about all this is understand that you can only have 1 item equipped plus any augments. You can have only 1 apparel equipped plus any augments. You can only have 1 artifact equipped plus any augments that it may have, and those are extremely rare and, well, I'll avoid spoilers here. And then the final thing is you have your consumables, which again do not need to be equipped. You basically just use them and lose them and put them in the item discard pile. Now I said, and I mentioned the thing here, that items can augment each other, and this is the very, very cool thing. You're going to notice that there are some symbols around various different sides of these different items. I will go ahead and use this apparel slot item here really quick. We can see that we have a triangle up, we have a triangle right, and we have a triangle down. That means if we get another item, and I'll show you exactly how equipment works, but later on, if we get the second item, since these 2 symbols match up, we can now equip these 2 items together, and now their effects are going to stack. And this does mean that they're going to give us their abilities. We can use both these items just as long as these 2 symbols match. That does mean that you only attach 1 helmet to 1 body, 1 shoe to 1 body, and 1 augment to 1 body, and you can't break up that pattern. The symbols need to match. Additionally, you're going to notice that you're going to see little symbols in some of these cards. This basically means that as long as this is equipped, you're going to have +1 to your body armor. As long as this is equipped, you're going to have +2 to your current mind attribute. And these do stack as you get multiple different items. These are going to continue to stack. Now, I mentioned earlier that the symbols must match up for augments to work. So that does mean that this augment does not work on this item. I can't augment this augment onto this item because you see the symbols don't match. There's no slot for the force alternator to get this kind of augment, so I can't use that augment. So if I continue to go through this deck of cards, you're going to see that some items do not offer any potential for augments at all. For example, the bouncing halberd or hurlbat cannot be augmented at all. You'll see that this hunting scope is just an augment. You'll see that this umbrella is a standalone item, but you also see that is also an augment. So now I can go ahead and equip these 2 items together, which means all their effects are going to stack, giving me all the powers of all these things combined. So if I have these 2 equipped together, remember you can generally only equip 1 item, but since these are 2 items that can connect together, I now have 2 effectively items equipped. Now I get all the powers of this item and all the powers of this item. No, yeah, don't forget, I also have +1 to my mind attribute, as long as I have this complete contraption all fully equipped. Next thing we do is we need to shuffle together all of our level 1 monsters, and the way we're going to tell what level monster is there's going to be a level symbol right here. We're going to take the entire stack of level 1 monsters and shuffle it together, unless the scenario tells us otherwise, and I'll just go ahead and cover what these monsters are. Most of our attributes should be pretty familiar because they look almost exactly like our hero attributes. We basically have our current armor, our current mind, we have the amount of health this creature has, so if it takes 1 point of damage, it's dead, and this is also the amount of stamina this creature has to go ahead and activate. We're going to see the special power right near here. It says spend 1 stamina, and then we're going to do whatever it says right here, and it also has a special thing here saying that's immobile. So basically at the start of the game, we're going to shuffle in all of our level 1 creatures, and to kill this creature, to use a good example, just using our prior example from earlier, if I were to use an attack that happened to use 2 white dice and 1 black die, I would simply roll those 2 dice together. And since I got a 2 plus 1 is a total of 3, if this had happened to be a physical attack, it would have missed and done 0 damage, meaning this creature is not going to be dead. If this had been an arcane attack, though, since I rolled a total of 3, its arcane attribute is a total of 3, it's going to take 1 point of damage, and since this creature only has 1 hit point, it would be dead. But just for dramatic purposes, I'll go ahead and put 1 wound on just so you can see what the wound counter looks like. If this creature had multiple hit points, we'd keep applying multiple wound counters until the amount of wound counters equals its health. Then it's dead. It's going to be removed from the board, and every time we kill a creature on an explorer turn, that explorer is going to gain 1 essence. But if a creature ever dies during a non-explorer turn, that reward of essence is not going to be gained by any of the players. Plan your turns better. Make sure enemies are dying on your turn. Otherwise, you're going to lose out on those nice little rewards. Although, some creatures do have specific rewards, and you're going to get those whether they die on your turn or on an explorer turn. And how do things die on explorer turns? Well, not going to ruin the surprise, but it can happen. Next up, we need to shuffle up all the scenario tiles, or I'm sorry, the non-scenario specific tiles. And again, these tiles are all double-sided, so you want to make sure that you give a good shuffle, and then after you shuffle up pretty darn well, the basic idea of what you're going to do is after you feel you got a good shuffle, and make sure you're, just for extra fun, you're flipping some of them over to make sure you're getting extra variety. So we take the bottom tile, and that bottom tile is going to be the first starting scenario tile for the very first starting chapter, whatever scenario you're playing. Next up, you just need to add the starting location onto the current tile that we're playing on. And we're going to add the starting axis that's going to be on this symbol right here. Now this symbol is going to be a letter of the alphabet, and this goal is going to be the connecting tile. This is going to be very important. We're adding extra tiles onto the board, because every time we add an extra tile onto the board by going through an exit or something like that, that's the direction that the new tile must always face. So just to show you a good example of that, if we had this tile right here just like this, and we had explorers exploring this side, and we decided that we were exploring over, and this was a new tile that was drawn, this is a tile we're going to add on because this symbol must connect from the direction we're coming from. Again, that symbol is where we're coming from. That's the tile we came from. Let's go and explain all these symbols on these tiles, because what the heck do all these symbols mean? Well, all these symbols mean very cool things, because these symbols are how we're going to win, or maybe just survive for another turn. So this is our starting tile right here, and the first important thing you need to do is make sure all the players in turn order. There is no turn order, in turn order, however you decide to do this. All the players must add their standee onto the board adjacent to the starting location, or actually on the starting location itself. Now in this game, all movement is allowed orthogonal and also diagonal. It is all completely legal. The only thing you can't do is you can't walk through walls, obviously. All doors always start open, and if a door is ever closed, what you need to do is you need to add a door symbol token onto the board on that specific door when you actually close it. And then if a door is ever completely destroyed, it's going to be removed from the board completely, because once a door is destroyed, it can't be put back on the board, and then we're going to add one of the destroyed door symbols. That's an important thing to understand. So once we got all our standees on the board, or if you happen to be me, you're painted miniature, but I'm not going to torture you with my painted miniatures here by putting them on the board. We're going to get our standee on the board. Once all the players are set up with their players, let's go ahead and pop this off and show you exactly what all these individual locations mean. So the first thing and the most important thing that we want to find our main target here is going to be a chapter goal. Now the chapter goal is very important, because without the chapter goal, generally speaking, we can't advance the chapters. This is what we're looking for to go ahead and advance the chapters. Once we go here and interact with it, we're going to advance a chapter. Now there's blocking chapters and certain criteria that may break that rule, but generally speaking, you want to get here as quickly as possible. Next up, you're going to see is going to be a recharge station. Now recharge stations are very important. They're all going to allow you to refill your resources. And if you ever forget what it looks like, it's a little gear symbol, and that's kind of important because this is a very steampunk game, so gear should make sense to you, and that should kind of fit. Next up, we're going to have these certain squares. If you ever see a square that looks like it's a venting grid, like venting or anything along those lines, basically you can see it right here. Those are all trap spaces. Trap spaces are activated by activating a trap lever right there. To activate a trap lever, you simply get next to it and activate, and I'll explain how it all works in just a little bit. Next thing we have is we're going to have spawn spaces. Spawn spaces are, you guessed it, that's where the bad guys are going to spawn. We have treasure chest locations, and then we have event spaces. Now these are all very important, because the final thing to mention is going to be a workbench. Again, I'm going to cover again how all these things work, but the important thing to understand is once you interact with a space, it cannot be interacted with by any other player anymore. Each one of these spaces are first come, first serve. Once they're activated, we're going to put one of these tokens on top of it to signify that space cannot be activated anymore. Now again, the cool thing is, while you can move orthogonal and diagonal, you can also interact orthogonal and diagonal, but everything must be from an adjacent space. And all these special spaces are blocking spaces, which means if I happen to be on the space, let's go and put our entry back out here. And let's say I decide to start right here. I cannot spend 1 stamina to move on top of that space because that is a block space. You cannot move on top of spaces because that's a block space. That's a block space. You can move on top of spawn points because they are just a general point unless there's a monster on top of it. Can't move through other monsters. I'll explain movement when we get to that point. But the important thing to understand is you can't actually move onto those spaces. You can move diagonal through corners, so I could go from a diagonal from here onto there. That does work perfectly fine. Again, I'll cover all that when we get to movement. Just understand the important thing about all these specific spaces, and once they're used, we're going to put that symbol on it, unless it happens to be a spawn symbol. Spawn spaces will continue to spawn every single round until we actively destroy them. Although the interesting thing is, if there happens to be a monster on every single spawn point, they are effectively blocked because you can't move through other monsters, you can't move through them at all, and they happen to be on these spaces, blocking it up for some strange rule. Again, it most likely won't happen, but I guess there's a potential it could happen. Nothing is going to spawn there. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, that's all fine and good. That's one heck of a long setup time. Well, trust me, it's actually a lot faster to actually set up when you play versus trying to explain it, but just stick with me here because the game is actually played over rounds. Every single round is broken down into 4 individual phases, and these phases will actually start playing very quickly when you're very, very familiar with the rules. Basic Explorer phase is going to be first. During the Explorer phase, our explorers are going to, you guessed it, they're going to go ahead and explore. They're going to interact with the board, they're going to spend stamina and do all those various different things. The next phase is going to be the spawn phase. During the spawn phase, we're going to get a chance for enemies to spawn on the board. Follow that up by the horror phase. During the horror phase, generally speaking, bad things are going to happen unless the dice are really in your favor. But again, it's a counting down tick-tock effect, because as you go through these different rounds, the chances of these spawn phases and horror phases not occurring are going to keep minimizing. You'll see what I mean when I actually explain these phases. And then finally, we're going to go to the monster phase. During the monster phase, the monsters get to actually activate, and these are the monsters, including the monster who just spawned on its turn when we start this round. Now, the important thing to understand, let's go ahead and just cover the Explorer phase here really quick, but the very first thing we need to understand is during the Explorer phase, at the start of the Explorer phase, every single one of our heroes, and if I keep referring to them as heroes versus explorers, leave a comment down below telling me that they're explorers and I should get it right next time. But the very first thing we need to do is all of our explorers need to reset their stamina back up to the current maximum. Remember, our current maximum is based on our current stat, plus any cards or effects that we have in play. The interesting thing about this game is that this game is played during the Explorer phase. There is no set turn order. All the players will refresh their stamina, and then we're going to pick whichever explorer wants to activate first. That explorer is going to take all of their actions, and they must complete their turn. If they have any stamina left over and they don't want to spend it, they are going to lose unspent stamina. That's how we're going to track which one of our explorers have activated. Because if you got your max stamina, guess what? You haven't gone this turn. If you're down to 0, yep, you've activated. Your turn is over. Also, I'll cover this very quickly before we get any further. The game does reference the term destroy quite a bit, and the game also references the term invoke quite a bit. Destroy means discard. Invoke means draw or activate. And I'll say it means activate because if it says invoked a destroy pile, that means the card that's currently face up in that specific discard pile is going to go ahead and reactivate. But if it says invoke a horror event, or invoke a player hero event, that means to draw the top card of that specific deck and do whatever that card says. But again, if it says invoke a destroy pile, whatever is the current top card in that discard pile, it's basically going to reactivate as if it was just drawn again, but it's going to remain in the discard, or the destroy pile. Next up, after we reset the stamina for all of our heroes, we must claim all of our effect tokens back. All these tokens last for one entire round until the start of the Explorer phase, so don't think I can debuff a creature and it's going to stay debuffed until it's dead. Nope. So I'm going to stay debuffed until the start of my next round, and I'm going to get all 3 of my tokens back. So let's go ahead and see just exactly what we can do on an Explorer's turn, because Explorers have lots of actions they can do, and I'm going to cover all these actions, but I'm not going to keep referencing the Explorer board. I'm basically going to say spend the stamina, and imagine I have enough stamina, I have an infinite amount of stamina to go ahead and perform all these actions, because I'm going to explain to you exactly how all these actions work. The very first thing, and the most important thing we're going to do, is we're going to have the movement action. Now, moving is going to allow you to move 1 square at the cost of 1 stamina. So if I spend 1 stamina, I can move 1 space. If I spend 3 stamina, guess what? I can move 3 spaces. Now I can move diagonal, I can move orthogonal. Again, I just must make sure I don't break the rule of I can't move on top of any special space, such as event space, treasure chests, workbenches. I can move on top of spawn spaces, and be very, very mindful that some spawn spaces might be on trap spaces, some of them may not be, and that could be very important when I explain to you about traps specifically. But basically, you're going to spend as much stamina as you want, and you can even break up your movement. I could, for example, if I was here for some dumb reason, at the start of my turn, I could spend 1 stamina to move right here. I can spend the amount of stamina it takes to interact with this space right here, finish with that space, spend 1, 2, 3 more stamina, spend some more stamina to go and activate this space, and then spend some more stamina to do various different things. You can break up your movement as much as you want, but let's go ahead and show you some good examples of exactly how movement works, especially with blocking locations. Now, the cool thing is, when it comes to these different tiles, you can move between enemies. So we have 2 enemies that are at an angle like that, perfectly diagonal from each other. We can spend 1 point of movement and move right here. The only thing we can't do is we can't move through enemies because they block our movement. Of course, there's a couple exceptions to that rule. There are such things such as ethereal units. Now, the term units is going to be used quite a bit in this game. Units references anything, whether it's an explorer or a monster on the board. But explorers are explorers, monsters are monsters, but both of them happen to be units. But do understand that even though I can move through ethereal creatures, for example, this was an ethereal creature, I could move through it. If ever something references obstacles, do understand that ethereal creatures are still obstacles, which means that you can't end your space on an obstacle. Because you never end your turn on top of an obstacle space, but you can see through obstacle spaces. That's very important, especially when it goes to drawing line of sight, and line of sight is very easy. You just go from center of your square to center of the target square. Other monsters can be obstacles, but you can definitely shoot through them. That's not a problem at all. The only final thing to understand is that when it comes to explorers who, or actually I should say any unit using teleports, understand that when they use a teleport power as to any passable space within some distance, we're going to ignore all the walls, we're going to ignore all obstacles, we're going to ignore all rubble, and we're going to ignore all closed doors to reach our destination space. So for example, if I activate a teleport power that gave me a range of 5, I can go teleport 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, going through all these walls, even if these walls had been covered by doors or anything like that. Teleport allows you to go completely through it, just ignoring all those things. It's really, really super nice. Now let's cover one more thing when it comes to movement, just because I know somebody is going to ask, and I want to make sure you know this. You can also move between obstacles on the board and other creatures. So I could spend 1 stamina, spend another stamina to move between these 2 spaces perfectly fine, continue my movement and interact with the board right there. And again, monsters don't create any kind of extra threat or anything like that. Moving away from them isn't going to cause free attacks on you or anything like that. You're perfectly fine there. Now, just to carry things out a little bit further, there are, like I said, multiple different spaces on the board, and they are going to cause various different sacrifices that we must make to go and interact with some of these spaces. For example, having to interact with a chapter space requires us to discard essence. Now, it doesn't have to come, all the essence doesn't have to come from one hero. Matter of fact, if there's multiple heroes in a chain connected to the hero who is spending the essence to activate the chapter space, we can all, in kind of a daisy chain, we can also donate to this expenditure of the essence to go and activate that space. So for example, if this hero wanted to activate this chapter space right here, they would spend the essence either all through themselves or borrow from this player or borrow from this player. If this hero explorer happened to be over here, they can't contribute to the essence lost by this player. Or if we even had a situation like this where this explorer happened to be over here and there was a break in the line right here, these explorers cannot donate for any of the essence lost, so this player must donate and spend all the essence to activate those spaces. Again, adjacency is very, very important when we're looking for donations of assistance along those lines. Also, understand that some of these tiles are going to have rubble on them or block spaces or bodies or something like that. Basically, if a space shows a whole bunch of bodies, I'm trying to avoid spoilers right here because there is a tile that has bodies across all these spaces, kind of partially blocking them, but it has to be across the entire square to block that square. If it's only part of the square has a rubble on it, for example, then it's not going to be a fully blocked square. It has to be the entire square has to be blocked off, and it's a completely unpassable spot. Also understand there are also pits. Pits are impassable spaces, and we see pits right down here, and you can also see a rubble space right here, and understand that they are not only impassable, but if you fall in a pit, it's a fall to your death. You are going to die. It doesn't matter how many hit points you have left. It does not matter. So for example, this hero explorer happened to be right here, and they use an ability that causes a knockback of 1 to everything around it. This will even knock back 1 space like this. It doesn't matter how many hit points this deep one has. He's going to live up to his name of a deep one, and he's going to fall into a deep, deep hole and fall to his death. But what about exploding barrels, you ask? I came here for lots of explosions and mayhem. Well, I'll explain to you how they work also. Some boards are also going to have exploding barrels, and we're going to notify these by the fact that it looks like a barrel and also has this little symbol that says, uh-oh, don't touch. So the interesting thing about exploding barrels is they can be hit, and if they take at least 1 point of damage, And remember, to do damage, we're simply going to roll dice. And the interesting thing is, to hit a barrel, you just need to get one success. So if I rolled these 3 dice right here, that barrel would be hit, especially if this plucky little hero decided to aim for this barrel right here. Anytime the barrel explodes, it's going to hit everything around it. We're going to roll our dice one time. One important thing to understand about this game is anytime we have area effect attacks, we're going to roll the dice one time. We're not going to roll them multiple times for every single target. This barrel explodes, it's going to hit everything around it, and we're going to roll once and target that versus all of their physical armors. And if that hits them, they're going to take 1 point of damage. Now, like I said, barrels only need to be a 1 or higher to hit it. So if I had a plucky hero right here who was rolling 3 attack dice, and as long as I got that result, that barrel would explode. Also understand that exploding barrels will hit ethereal creatures. It's a very, very nice thing and a very great way to take out ethereal creatures. Also understand that knockback will also trigger a barrel also. So if our explorer right here had a knockback effect on this Yedithian, he would hit this Yedithian back into this barrel right here. This barrel would explode, and again, we would roll all the dice, and we would see if that hits any of the creatures. They're all going to take 1 point of damage if we beat their physical armor. Again, exploding barrels do hit ethereal creatures. Don't forget that. That's a great way to take them out. Along with traps, which also hit ethereal creatures. Again, a great way to take out ethereal creatures. One final thing to cover with the boards right here, besides the trap levers, is going to be spawn spaces. Now, when it comes to spawn spaces, these are where enemies are going to spawn. Anytime any hero triggers a spawn, it's going to activate the spawn space that is closest to this hero. So if we're playing a solo hero game and we have no monsters on the board, this hero triggered a spawn, this is a spawn space that's going to activate because it is the closest one to our hero. So that's how the spawn spaces work. The nice thing about spawn spaces is they are passable terrain, so we can move right through them, no problem at all. But the best thing about spawn spaces is we can seal a spawn space. If we spend 3 stamina and 4 essence, we're going to decrease the monster threat by 1. If there's any enemy unit on top of that spawn space, when I deactivate it, it is also going to be defeated. So that's a good way to take out those ethereal enemies also. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to place 2 tokens on top of that spawn space that signifies that this spawn space has been taken out, which means no more monsters can spawn from there. And yes, if you're playing a 1-tile board so far, there's no other boards out there, and you've managed to deactivate both of the spawn spaces, that means that no monsters can spawn anymore. Once you deactivate a spawn space, though, you're going to find the local chapter tile section, and you're going to add a lit chapter space onto that. Signifies that this is now a lit chapter space. And the important thing to understand about lit chapter spaces is they are a lot cheaper to activate in the future, which is going to help all of the other players, especially if you're trying to advance the storyline. Next up, we have our trap spaces. Now, the nice thing about trap spaces is that they only cost 2 stamina to activate, and they can be activated by heroes, and they can also be activated by monsters. Now, trap spaces are affiliated with a certain trap lever, and the trap lever, all you need to do to activate a trap lever is be next to the trap lever and spend 2 stamina. Now, monsters can activate trap levers also, and they have to spend 3 stamina to do so, but they can only be activated by scheming monsters. Now, a scheming monster is a monster that's controlled by a player. AI-controlled monsters never activate traps at all. They're just not that smart. Thankfully, they're not that smart. Now, anytime you activate a trap space, just like any other space in the game, as soon as you activate it, you're going to signify it's been activated by putting one of those tokens on top of it. Then any unit, and I'm going to emphasize unit because that does mean our poor unfortunate explorer right there, is going to be hit by a trap if they happen to be on one of these vent spaces. Now, the important thing to understand is if we're playing a board that has multiple boards laid out, we have multiple boards laid out, activating this trap space is only going to activate all the traps on this tile right here, not on the multiple tiles. But if you ever have a situation that says that, for example, a horror card that says activate a trap, it's going to activate traps on all the tiles. So if we activate a lever, it's going to be that specific tile only, but if it doesn't get activated by a specific lever right there, that means all the current boards in play. Then once we do so, we're simply going to roll the dice once, and we're going to compare the 3 black dice to all the targets around trap spaces. Anyone who is equal to that number that we roll or under is going to take 1 point of damage. Next up, we have recharge stations. Now, recharge stations are awesome. They allow us to do something very, very cool. But first, we must pay their cost. First thing we must do before we use a recharge station is we must spend 1 stamina to go ahead and activate it. And then we're also going to put that symbol on top of it to signify that space has been activated. Once we do so, we're going to spend the 1 stamina to activate it, and then we're going to roll this die right here. Now, this die has 6 sides. One can be this horribly unlucky side right here, which means nothing happens. Or we may get these little open circles right here, which matches the stamina symbol, and that's how much stamina we're going to gain back from doing so. And then finally, there's also a heart symbol, which allows you to heal. Now, if you're full life, that basically means that does no effect for you. You're not getting any health back, because you can never go beyond your starting maximum for your specific hero. Next up, we have workbenches. Now, workbenches are super duper awesome, and every time we activate a workbench, don't forget that once it's activated, we're going to cover up to signify that it cannot be used anymore by any of our explorers. What we're going to do is we're going to spend 3 stamina to go ahead and activate the workbench. Then we're going to draw 3 cards from any of the available item decks in the game. That doesn't mean we can draw 3 cards from here, 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 or here. And we're going to draw the cards in total without revealing them. So it doesn't mean I could take this one card here, I could take this one card here, and still haven't looked at them and say, nope, I think I want this card right here. And we're going to take all 3 of these cards before we reveal them. Once we pick our total amount of cards, then we're going to go ahead and reveal those cards. And after we reveal these cards, we can decide if we can want to take any of these cards and trade them with any cards that we currently have in our inventory or currently have equipped. And we can kind of trade these back and forth. So for example, I can say that I want to keep this, and then maybe I had an item that I really didn't like, such as, well, let's just draw an item right here. Let's say I had this item right here. I can go ahead and return this item to the stack. And then after I've done all that, I'm going to pick one of these cards to keep. And I can either keep it for myself or give it to an adjacent hero. So for example, our hero right here who activated this workbench, if he happened to be next to this hero right here, this may be the hero activated, but he may give the card to this player right here. So remember, you can switch these cards over to the heroes. Then you're going to decide to destroy the remaining cards. Remember, destroy means they're all going to go to the community discard pile. Or you can place these cards back on top of the respective deck, and you can do that in any combination. So for example, I could destroy this card and then put these 2 back on top of the deck, and that kind of gives the other players advantage because they know that, that awesome spear is now currently the top card. I may want to go and be the next person to go do an explore action on a desk or workbench or a treasure chest, so I can go ahead and get that really cool spear. Finally, after this happens, the hero who activated the workbench is going to perform a use inventory effect. That's basically a fancy way of just saying equip. You're going to unequip all of your items and then decide to go ahead and requip everything however you want based on your current stuff that you have in your inventory not equipped or anything like that. Make sure you're respecting the rules I said earlier where things have to be connected correctly. You can only have 1 item, 1 apparel, 1 artifact, and an unlimited amount of consumables, because remember, consumables are not equipped, but once you go ahead and equip everything back up, you are completely done with your turn. Next thing we have is going to be treasure chests. And treasure chests are super awesome. Once we get next to a treasure chest, again, just like anything else, we are going to put one of these tokens on top of the treasure chest to signify that it has been activated. We're going to spend 3 stamina to do so, and then we're going to resolve the gain item effect. To gain the item effect, we're going to pick 2 cards from any one of these decks. Again, we pick them from the same deck or different decks. I can go 1 artifact, and let's just go ahead and decide that we're going to take 1 apparel just like that. We're going to reveal both of these cards, and we're going to decide to take one of these items and keep it, and the item we don't keep, we are either going to decide to destroy, which means it goes to the community discard pile, or we can place it back on top of the deck where it came from, and then we will take this item. Now, one important thing to understand is that whenever we go ahead and investigate a treasure chest, there are specific items that are specific to all of our heroes, our explorers excel. Gunmen love apparel. Bruisers love weapons. Mystics love artifacts, and crafters, well, they love everything. And that basically means if you take one of those items, you may equip it for free, just as long as it doesn't violate any rules, and we can't make it as an augment. So since this is an augmented helm, if I currently have an armor equipped, that means I must unequip all of my armor, then equip the helm in place of it. But if I don't have any armor equipped at all, and I am currently playing myself, since apparel goes to gunman, if I'm currently playing a gunman, I can equip that helm. But again, if I have at least 1 apparel equipped, I'm either going to replace this with my current apparel, or I'm just going to put this in my inventory as a currently unequipped item. The nice thing about doing all this, though, is remember that wonderful statistic of essence I told you about? This is a great way to gain essence, because every time you open a treasure chest, after you've done all this card play, you're going to go ahead and gain 1 essence. Again, you cannot go beyond your maximum essence, though, so that's the most important thing to understand. And next up, we have event spaces. And hey, conveniently, I happen to be next to an event space this time, so I don't have to make my hero teleport all across the board to show you how this works. But to do an event space, you're simply going to put one of these tokens on there to show that this event space has been destroyed. You're going to spend 3 stamina, and then you're going to draw an Explorer card. Now remember, the Explorer hero deck is this deck with the blue back right here. Don't draw the red cards unless you want to make life much more difficult for your heroes. But the simple thing you're simply going to do is you're going to, as the game says, invoke an Explorer event, or as I like to refer to it, draw the top card. You're going to read the thematic text, and you're going to do exactly what it says. Now, sometimes they're going to give you immediate effects, and I'm not going to cover all the symbols in this video because it's going to drive all of you crazy, because all these symbols are very specific. They're all listed in the back of the book, and they actually do make sense very well. Just basically, when you see the symbols, pull out the rule book, look what that symbol means, and generally it's going to say, in this example, activate immediately. So in this case, I'm going to restore 2 essence. That'd be kind of cool, because I gained an essence for the event. Now I'm going to gain 1 more for a total of 3. That'd make me kind of, sort of, very happy. And of course, the important thing to understand is whenever you interact with an event space, you are also going to gain a point of essence. So treasure chests give you essence, and event spaces also give you essence. That's a great way to get essence besides defeating enemies. Now, our final thing we get to deal with is we get to deal with the chapter space. Now, the chapter space can be in 2 forms. It can be lit, and the only way it can be lit most of the time is by destroying a spawn space. Most of the time we're going to interact with these chapter spaces, they're not going to be lit. So let's go ahead and cover that first. To interact with the chapter space, we need to do this to interact and advance the storyline. This is going to allow us to flip to the next chapter in the storybook. So when I interact with that, I'm going to flip this card over and we're going to move to the next chapter. Now there are blocking chapters and there are specific chapters. I'm going to cover those because guess what? Our next chapter is going to be blocking. I'll explain how that works in just a second. But to interact with this space, we're just basically going to spend 3 stamina and we're going to spend 3 essence, and we're going to put that token on top of it if it's not lit. I'll explain lit in just a second. After we go ahead and do that, we're going to advance to the next chapter by flipping over the next chapter card, which is going to signify chapter 2. It's going to tell us to readjust our current spawn rate, our current horror event, and oh no, we get a blocking chapter. I'll explain that in just a second. We're going to look to see if there's any chapter effects that say occur right at the start of the chapter after we read our very thematic text. So in this case, it's going to say explorers may move up to 2 spaces. So I get 2 free spaces of movement. Anything that happens to be there, we must look at it. We may also gain new abilities that are specific to this chapter only. For example, I can sacrifice 1 life to move 3 spaces. Or if I sacrifice a total of 4 life among the entire party, guess what? We're going to move to the next chapter, because now I'm going to explain blocking chapters. Because a blocking chapter means that the only way I can advance from chapter 2 to chapter 3 is not by interacting with these chapter spaces. I can interact with these chapter spaces as much as I want. If it's a blocking chapter, it does nothing at all. The only way to advance to the next chapter is by doing exactly what this chapter says, which means as a group, we must sacrifice 4 health. And every time we sacrifice 1 of our health, doesn't matter who does it, we're going to put 1 of these tokens on this card, signifying that we're 1 step closer. Once the 4th one has done it, you guessed it, we're going to move to the next chapter. Additionally, there may be chapters that are called exit chapters, which basically is going to tell you to add an exit token onto the board. You're going to add an exit token onto the board on any corner that does not currently have an exit token or is not currently blocked. And it's simply the only way to advance the storyline for this specific chapter is our hero must get on top of that, spend 2 stamina, and go ahead and vacate the board. And that's how we're going to advance the chapter right there for those kinds of specific chapters. Just want to cover that really quickly because I know that's going to be a question a lot of you are asking. But generally speaking, our chapters are how we're going to advance the chapters. And since I've already explained it, how do we handle when it's a lit chapter? Well, when it's a lit chapter, instead of spending 3 stamina and 3 essence, we simply spend 1 essence to advance the chapter. I'm sorry, we spend 1 stamina, 1 essence. I apologize there. But we spend 1 stamina instead of the 3 stamina and 3 essence. And since it's a lit chapter, we're going to flip that over, signifying that chapter has been activated. And then we're going to do the rest of that chapter stuff just like we normally would. Thematic text, readjust the 2 sliders, do anything that happens to be for that specific chapter, and look what rules we need to follow. Now let's cover 2 really things right here, and these are some minor caveats that you might see in some later adventures, but the first important thing I'll cover right here is you're not always going to see a spawn rating, and you're not always going to see a horror rating. If you don't, it's not a typo. That basically means that scenario may not have a spawn rating, and it may not have a horror rating, but it's definitely going to have some specific rules that's going to tell you how to affect the spawn and the horror. Additionally, whenever a hero exits from a tile by following the rules to exit that specific chapter, when that player spends the 2 stamina to be removed from that tile through that specific exit, they're removed from the game until that chapter is over. You're going to skip their turn, you're going to skip their activations, they're not going to do anything else until all the heroes are either dead or also escape via the exit tile. It's not one hero needs to escape. all of our surviving heroes need to make to that exit tile. They all need to escape, and that's how we're going to advance that chapter. And that's only for specific chapters that actually have an exit. If there's no exit and there's no blocking for that specific scenario, then the only way to advance the chapter is by using these specific chapter advancing spaces. It's a very important thing. That's one thing that I had struggled with when I was learning how to play the game. Chapter spaces are generally how you're advancing the chapters, unless it's a blocking chapter. If it's a blocking chapter, it will tell you how to advance the next chapter. If it's an exit chapter, all of our surviving heroes must get to the exit. That's the only way to advance. Now, there are some chapters, trying to avoid spoilers, where actually it's not a blocking chapter, but it gives you other ways to advance the chapter. If it's not a blocking chapter and gives you other ways, then you now have options. You're either going to do the advancement the way the chapter card tells you, or you can use the chapter space. Those are the rare situations where you actually have an option. And it's a really good option. You may want to look at all your options very carefully, because sometimes it can be very challenging with the next chapter that you move into. The next action our heroes can do is they can explore tile edges, because these maps can get large and sprawling and they can start spreading across the board. If you ever have an edge that does not currently have an exit or an entrance on it, a explorer can move next to that edge just like that. They can spend 2 stamina, and then we're going to take the stack of tiles and we're going to draw the top tile and we are going to add it to the board. Now remember, we need to add it by joining the way the board naturally forms by having the next tiles connector being from the direction that our hero came from. And I guess I should use a hero, not a door. That's actually kind of funny. So since our hero came from this direction, the tile must connect right here, and then we can continue our actions if we happen to have stamina left over. The important thing to understand, though, is that our current board can never be bigger than a 2x2 section. And that does mean that if we happen to explore this direction, and if we keep on exploring this direction, we manage to make it all the way down here and explore this edge again, the tile that is all the way up here is going to be removed from the board. Any monsters that are on that board are also going to be destroyed, and then we will continue moving and exploring that direction. So it's kind of like a scrolling board if you want to think about it that way, but just understand the board can never be more than 2 across and 2 up and down. So never a 2x2 column or greater than a 2x2 row. It's as big as the board will ever get every time you play the game. And yes, you can abuse that. If you watch my playthrough, I actually use that and abuse that very well to take out an ethereal enemy that I had no other way of really conceivably taking out. Again, if you really want to make this a lot easier, don't forget to watch my playthrough where I play through the entire Horror in the Ice, which is also a really good way to learn how to play the game, by watching others do it. Although I guess it should go without saying that you can't advance tiles when an explorer is on the tile that's about to be removed from the game. Remember, we're playing a cooperative game. We're not trying to kill the guy who's across the table trying to help us. So if there's another player who's on the back tile that's about to be removed, we can't actually explore that direction. No killing your partners. It's not a good thing to do. Bad way to play your co-op games. So the next thing we can do is we can interact with doors. Now remember, every time a new tile appears on the board, all the doors are open. As an action, if we happen to be next to a door with our explorer, we can go ahead and actually open these doors or close these doors. It's simply spending 2 stamina to do so. We spend 2 stamina, we're going to put a closed door token right there. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, the reason why you want to do that is because monsters, as long as they're only controlled by the AI and not controlled by another player, the only way they can get through doors is by breaking them down by spending 4 stamina. So you can use this as a stalling tactic to slow the monsters down, because they have to spend so much stamina to break down a door. The negative here is that once a door is broken, it's removed, it can't be closed ever again. But as long as that door does not get broken, we can continue to open and close it anytime we want just by spending 2 stamina. Now, of course, I'm saying monsters can't do this by the generic AI. When the AI is controlled by another player who's been eliminated, then they actually have the option to interact with doors. And I'll cover how that works in just a second. The important thing to understand about doors, though, is the only way to interact with a door is by being orthogonal. This is one of those rare times where you cannot be diagonal. So I cannot be in that space and interact with that door. I have to be orthogonally adjacent to it, and that goes the same for monsters. They can't break doors by being orthogonal. They need to be next to the door, spend the total amount of 4 stamina to break the door. And of course, our heroes can also break doors, but generally speaking, there's not much logic in doing so. They're better off spending the 2 stamina to go ahead and just open and or close the door. Of course, all of our heroes have explorer abilities. I'm not going to cover them. You basically read your card. They also may have consumables. I'm not going to go over them because you basically just use a consumable. Do what the card says and you move on. And also our heroes can use their equipped items. Now I covered how equipped items work and how we can never have more than 1 apparel, more than 1 weapon, more than 1 artifact. Unlimited consumables, but those apparel, weapon, artifacts have to be equipped. They're going to give us different abilities and how they're going to work. But basically the way they work is we're going to spend stamina, they're going to give us a range, they're going to do something, and we're going to do whatever that something is, and then we're going to continue taking action as long as we have stamina left to do so. You can also, if you're not liking the way your current gear is equipped, you can go ahead and spend 3 stamina with your hero to go ahead and fully re-equip all of your gear. That means you're going to spend a 3 stamina, and you will unequip all of your items. Then you're going to go ahead and re-equip all your items in any order you want, however you want, with any augments you want, which means you can effectively use this to remove augments or add augments back onto a character sheet. So that's just a very important thing that you can do. It's a very good way to keep moving about our gear. Also, our heroes, don't forget, also have actions that we're going to get from possibly from the chapter cards. We can spend these by just spending the resource at any time as long as our turn has not been ended by us burning through all our stamina, saying, yes, our turn is over. Although, to be fair, if it doesn't say we have to actually spend stamina to do it, that means we can actually do it at any time. So that's the important thing to understand. Some of these will say spend stamina to do something. If it says spend stamina, you can only do it on your turn. But if it doesn't have that specific stamina cost, that means you can do it anytime, even if it is not your current explorer's active turn. Of course, all of our heroes can use their inventory at any time. They can also use Bound Explorer event cards. I'll go ahead and cover Bound Explorer event cards because it's very, very important. They're going to give our heroes extra abilities, and the way we're going to decide if a card is a Bound event card is we're going to look at the card, and we're going to look for this chain symbol right here. If we ever have that chain symbol on a card, that means it's actually going to give our hero, whoever acquires that card, is going to get that power. For example, this one says our hero now has a permanent power that whenever they use a recharge station, we're going to restore 1 stamina for free. And at any time, we can destroy this card to go ahead and trigger all the traps on our current board. So we need to decide, do we want to keep this card equipped as a bound equipped item to continue to get this effect, or do we want to sacrifice it for one-time use to activate all triggered traps? It's a nice powered card. We may want to decide exactly what we do. And if you watch my playthrough, I abuse that card quite a bit. It's a really nice card. Generally speaking, when we're playing the game, though, the game does have a very continuous flow. We're not going to ever reset anything unless the chapter cards actually tell us to reset something. So that means that when we advance to a new chapter, we're not going to restart the round. The round is going to keep playing throughout those phases. So, for example, if we are playing a game and we are the final explorer to activate on our turn, and we burn the last of our stamina to go ahead and activate the chapter space. We're going to do everything in the chapter space, or the chapter advancement tells us to do by flipping the new chapter card, and then we're going to continue the round. And since we're the last explorer to go, that means we're going to move right into a spawn phase, move into a horror phase, and oh yeah, then the monster's going to get to activate. So it's something we need to be very much paying attention to. But that's not always the case. For example, some chapters, for example, this chapter right here, are going to tell us that we actually need to start a new round when this chapter comes into effect. So when we start a new chapter by starting a brand new round, sometimes we are going to just start a new round and continue where we carried over from. Sometimes we're going to re-enter the board on a new tile, resetting the entire board layout and starting all over with a brand new chapter, basically signifying we may have moved on somewhere else in the storyline. And whenever this happens, we're simply going to do our normal starting thing by adding our starting location right here, adding our heroes onto the board either next to the starting location or actually on the starting location itself. We're going to do whatever this card may tell us to do. For example, this one's going to tell us at item level 3, where all may be able to explore, maybe exchange with each other. We may be able to use our inventories, and we're going to basically go ahead and advance the storyline just like that. The important thing to understand, though, is that whenever we're adding cards of a certain item level, we're not going to shuffle in the destroyed pile. We're just basically going to add these cards to the current active deck. So if I have this active deck, which has level 1 and level 2 cards in it, and it tells me I had level 3 cards, I'm basically going to draw the level 3 cards and shuffle them into this remaining deck. I'm not going to draw the discard pile. It's just going to be added into our current active deck that we happen to have going on right now. Now, the slight exception to this is when we enter the end game. Now, I'm not going to show the end game card, but I'll show the end game tile. It's not too much of a spoilery type thing right here. But whenever we add in the end game tile, every one of these end game tiles actually shows you where the spawn point happens to be for all of our heroes. So in this case, this in-game tile shows that the spawn point is here, so we can spawn at any one of those locations just like that. Put our heroes on the board just like that. And then this is going to start over a complete new thing with its own individual rules and their own individual things and stuff that we need to do. Now I know I sat here and said, hey, I'm not going to make this like my Arkham Horror 2nd Edition video, and it's starting to feel like it, but the good news is we're pretty much done with the Explorer phase. I know I kind of went a little bit quick with some of that, but I don't want this video to run for 4 hours. I want you to be able to watch this video, learn how to play the game, and hey, we're done with the Explorer phase, so now let's go into the Spawn phase. Got to do that a little bit dramatic, makes it more fun. So basically for the spawn phase, what is going to happen for every single spawn phase is we are going to do a spawn phase for every one of our explorers that happens to be in the game. So that means a game with 3 explorers is going to be a lot more fun than a game with only 2 explorers. Because with 1 explorer, we only have 1 explorer activating the spawn phase. With 3 explorers, you got it. We got 3 explorers activating the spawn phase. And the way this is going to work is every single hero, it doesn't matter what order you're going to do this, is going to roll the 10-sider. And basically we're going to compare that number to the current active spawn level that we happen to be at. If we roll less than the current spawn level for that active hero, we're going to reduce the spawn level down by 1 point. And then the next hero or explorer gets to roll. If they roll equal to or greater than the current spawn rating, the first thing we need to do is we need to reset the spawn rating back to the active maximum for the current chapter we happen to be on. So this is a 6 spawn rating chapter we see right here. And then we're going to count up the current amount of monsters that happen to be on the board. If there is 1, 2, 3, or well, basically if there's 1, 2, or 3 monsters were on the board, we're A-okay, and the only thing we're going to do is we're going to spawn a monster on the spawn tile that is closest to the hero who failed the roll. So for example, in this case, if this was this hero who rolled at 5, we know that this monster would spawn right here. But what happens if we have 4 monsters on the board and a hero goes ahead and rolls terribly and rolls for a spawn? Well, we can never have more than 4 monsters on the board, so the next thing that's going to happen is the current threat level is going to go up by 1. The threat level ever gets to this point right here, not to this point, but if it ever gets to this point right here, we're going to reset the spawn level all the way back down to the level right here, and we're going to advance into level 2 monsters. Once this happens, we're going to take the complete stack of all monsters that are currently in the game that are not on the board. We're going to add in all the monsters from the discard pile, or as the game calls it, the destroy pile, and then we're going to shuffle in all the level monsters of the level we just went into. So if we're at level 1 and we went to level 2, if our discard pile looked like this and our draw pile looked like this, we'd pick up our entire discard pile, add it to our draw pile, shuffle into level 2 monsters, and then that is going to be our new monster stack because we've advanced the spawn to that point. After we figure that out, if there's any heroes left over who have not rolled for the spawn, you guessed it, they also need to roll for the spawn. They'll roll, and remember on this die, unless you're playing with a variant, 0 equals 10. There's a variant in the rules that allows you to make 0 actually 0. So in that case, 0 would be less than 6, I would go down. But since we're not playing with that variant, since 0 is equal to or greater than 6, we would have another spawn phase. And if we're in a terrible situation right here where we have 4 monsters on the board still, again, we're going to advance that threat level. The threat level ever gets all the way up to level 5, and if we ever need to, or I'm sorry, if the monster level gets level 5, we ever need to raise the threat level at all, the hero who rolled for that spawn and failed that spawn must discard an item. If they fail to discard an item, they're dead. Doesn't matter how many hit points left, they're dead. And if I wasn't specific enough about this, when the monster level reaches level 5 and we must increase the threat level, it's every explorer who must discard an item. Not just one explorer, every explorer must discard an item when we get to that point. So you must understand that there's some extreme time pressures in this game. And again, every explorer who doesn't discard an item is going to be dead. When a new monster respawned, it's going to be added to the spawn queue in the order it came out. So in this example, this was a monster that came out first, and this would be the spawn queue. Whenever a monster is defeated, it's going to be removed from the spawn queue, and it's going to make room for all the other monsters to move in. And of course, as more monsters spawn, they're going to go ahead and be added to the spawn queue. Of course, since we never have more than 4 monsters on the board, that means the spawn queue can never be more than 4 total, and this is the order the monsters are going to activate in when we get to the monster activation. The spawn phase is truly just a spawn phase. That's when all the baddies are coming in. They don't quite get to activate yet, because now we get to go to the horror phase. At the start of the horror phase, the very first thing we are going to do is we're going to place all of the horror markers right next to the horror track right here to signify any effects that may be lasting versus the heroes. Now, if you ever forget, there are 4 of these to remind you, and they're basically going to be a nice reminder. We're going to place them on top of heroes if they start affecting our heroes, but they're a nice little reminder. But also signifies that at the beginning of the horror phase, they all get removed from our heroes, so that's what we do to keep track of how those are going to work. So the nice thing about the horror phase is only one hero gets to roll the horror die, not one hero, or not for each explorer. It's just a one-time roll only. It's a nice, wonderful thing because you don't want to do this for every one of your heroes because the horror phase is truly horrific. So pick a lucky player who gets to decide the fate of all of our heroes, and they are going to roll a die. If they roll equal to or greater than the current horror rating that is currently active in the game, we are going to have a horror event. If they happen to roll lower than the current horror rating, we're simply going to lower down the horror rating by 1. But if the horror rating is under the current horror rating for the current chapter we're in, and if we roll higher than the current horror rating, we will reset it back up to 4. Either way, if we roll equal to or greater than the current horror level right now, we are going to have a horror event. Or as the game likes to call it, says resolve invoke horror. And then we simply draw the top card from the horror deck, read all the nice thematic text, and we're going to do exactly what the card says right here. Now, the unfortunate thing about cards from the horror deck is they are going to go into the destroyed horror pile, which is always going to be placed face up to the side of the board so you never forget it. And the card that's currently on top is the one that's going to have the permanent effect as long as that card is in effect. So as long as this card is in effect, I must reduce Explorer's maximum stamina by 1 until a new horror event occurs. We read that thematic text and then it replaces the current one, and now this is the current horror power that is going to be in effect until this horror card has been replaced. And finally, now we get to the monster phase. Now this is a chance where the bad guys get to activate, and maybe I should fix the board a little bit here because we have 1 poor explorer versus 4 monsters. That just looks quite grim and quite sad, and it looks like a bad time for our explorers. Let's go ahead and fix that. So basically the way this is going to work is the monsters are going to activate in the order of the current monster queue. So that does mean in this case the Cthulhu will activate, then the Yedithian will activate, then the Migo or Mygo. Then finally, if this happened to be a witch, then the witch would activate. But we don't have a witch, we have a deep one. So let's burn the witch and bring back the deep one, and let's show you exactly how these monsters are going to activate. So as I said earlier, the monsters are going to be in either one of 2 states. They're going to be scheming monsters or scheming monsters, however you want to pronounce it, which basically means they're going to be controlled by any of the players who are dead. When players are dead, they take all the actions for the monsters, they make all the decisions for the monsters, and you want to play aggressively, try to take out the other heroes. If there are no explorers who are dead, that means the monsters are going to be controlled by an AI, and they're going to activate via their AI and try to follow the pre-scripted AI. So the first thing to understand is if a monster can't play any of its active abilities and is not adjacent to an explorer, it will move towards the nearest explorer. If a monster is blocked by other monsters and it can't position itself to end closer to the nearest explorer, it will end its turn and do nothing. Mindless monsters spend 4 stamina to destroy doors. That's basically the only thing they can do. They cannot open doors. They don't have the ability to undo locks, and latches are just far too complex for them. The nice thing though is, as I said earlier, scheming monsters only have to spend 3 stamina to destroy a door. So if it's mindless, 4 stamina to destroy a door. If it's a scheming monster, it's only going to be 3 stamina to break down the door. And of course, we always skip the monster phase if the monster queue is empty, which means if all the monsters are removed from the board, we're not even going to do the monster phase at all. And the final thing to understand when it comes to the monster AI is the monsters are going to re-evaluate after spending every single point of stamina for their movement. And basically the way monsters are going to work is they're going to move towards the closest hero. They will try to get adjacent orthogonally. They do not like diagonals, and they will get as close as they need to go ahead and activate their powers. So that does mean, just to use a perfect example right here, the Yedithian has a 2 stamina range 3 ability. So it happens to be right here at the start of its turn. It is not going to move. It's going to target the nearest hero, which will be this hero right here. It will spend 2 of its 5 remaining stamina to attack with 3 white dice. It'll roll the 3 white dice, and it'll compare that to this current hero's armor. If this hero has 3 armor, they would take 1 wound. If they have 4 or more armor, they will take no wounds at all. Since this creature still has 3 remaining stamina left to activate of its 5, that means it still has a target. It will reevaluate and attack the same target. If this target had died from that attack, though, that would change things kind of. Now it's going to attack anything within a range of 3. Since it still has something within a range of 3, and it still has 3 stamina, it would now attack this hero. But one of the situations was a little different, and both these heroes were positioned just like that, which means it's not in range of either one of these heroes at all. It will spend 1 stamina to move towards the closest hero. Now that's within the range of its ability. That means it's now going to attack with its remaining ability, its remaining 2 stamina. And again, to attack this hero right here, and it'll roll. And if I got a total of 4 right here, that is equal to or greater than this hero's current armor value, then they would take 1 wound. And again, if they were killed, they'd be removed from the board. And then, since he's out of stamina, we would now activate the remaining monsters. If the remaining monster was a deep one, we would activate its AI by moving 1,
2. Since the deep one does not have a ranged attack, it would need to get adjacent to her hero. Since it spent 3 stamina to get all the way over here, and we see that deep one has 5 stamina, it takes 2 stamina, has a range of 2. Oops, actually has a ranged attack. So let's go ahead and fix that right here. So I spent 2 stamina to get right here. I have 3 stamina left over. I would do a ranged attack versus this hero right here with 3 black dice. I would roll, and if this is equal to or greater than this hero's armor, they would take 1 wound. If it was less than their armor, they will not take any wounds. And then, since we have 1 stamina left over, we will do nothing because we're still within range, and we're still close enough and still able to do things, and we're still not at diagonal. We are at an orthogonal, so the deep one would be perfectly happy at that point. Although, since I had 1 stamina left over, no, actually it would stay perfectly right where it is. And that's basically how the monster AI works.
Now, the game is going to continue to play like this. Players are going to win the game by advancing through the chapters, then completing the endgame scenario victory condition, or if the scenario doesn't have an endgame, players win by resolving the chapter with the victory effect. Survivors do share victory in this game, but dead explorers, well, they may be lost in darkness, and you can taunt them a little bit. Yes, they're going to be part of the victors, and they get to share in the celebration of beating this game. Chapters usually advance by taking an action at the chapter spaces, like I said, but again, that's not always the case. Make sure you're watching out for those blocking chapters, and make sure you're watching out for the chapters that have the exits on them. The way the players are going to lose the game is by dying. Death is permanent in this game. When you die, you're out of the game. You're going to start controlling the bad guys. Or if the players reach the end game and the defeat condition is met, the players lose also. So basically, we're going to play until all of us are dead, or we reach the end game and succeed at the end game, or we reach the end game and we succeed. And that's basically how the game works. There's just a couple points left to explain to you, and I'm going to rattle these points off super duper quick here. The first thing to understand is essence. Essence is super important in this game. Without essence, you can't win the game. It literally takes essence to advance the game. If you can't spend essence, you're lost. The good thing about essence, though, is it also can be used for hit points. Anytime a hero takes a point of damage, they can take that point of damage either from their direct hit points, or if they choose to, they can take that point of damage from their essence. So essence, it can be used for health, it can be used for activating abilities, it can be used for activating chapters. So understand that essence is extremely important for our heroes. It's basically restored by activating any event space, which we can find event spaces right here. It is also restored by going ahead and activating any kind of chest. It's also gained by destroying monsters. If a hero destroys a monster on that hero's turn, we will gain 1 point of essence. So this hero explorer destroys this monster, they will also gain 1 point of essence. Also, there are specific abilities that can also restore essence. There's also cards that may do things, but essence is lost by using it instead of health. We can also spend essence to increase our attack roll by spending 1 essence per point of essence spent, and we can do that after the roll. So for example, this hero wanted to take out this Yadithian, and we happened to get close to it, and we rolled our attack dice just like that, and let's say we rolled a 4. But unfortunately in this situation, this was a super duper armored Yadithian who happens to have 6 armor. I can spend, after the roll, spend 2 essence to make it up to 6, which will allow me to do the point damage, which may allow me to take it out. So I spend the essence afterwards. We'd also use essence to steal spawn spaces. We can also use it to pay for our abilities. And also the big important thing, don't forget, just to go over this one more time, you can also contribute essence to activate those chapter spaces, which can be highly important by making sure our heroes form some kind of chain. As long as they form a chain and they're connected to other heroes, they can also help sacrifice the essence to go ahead and activate chapter spaces. So if this player was active player, they could spend the 3 stamina to activate this space, given 1 essence, one essence for a total of 3 essence to go ahead and activate that chapter space. So the players can cooperatively use essence together as long as they're connected orthogonally and diagonally. Do also note that this player does not need to spend any essence at all. They could be the one to activate this space by spending the stamina. This player can give up 2 stamina or 2 essence, and this player can give up 1 essence, or this player can give up all 3 of the essence, channeling through this hero to activate this chapter space, which is very important, and it could save your life as you're playing the game, because this game can be extremely challenging. I'll just go over attacks for you really quick again, just to make sure you understand it. Also to keep in one closing section that says spread out across the entire video, because I've kind of spread out across the entire video here. But to cover how attacks work, attacks in this game are extremely simple. Everything is going to basically roll a certain amount of attack dice,
and that's going to be based on their specific card. For example, the Ethereal rolls white dice. We see that it rolls 3 white dice. The deep one we see rolls black dice. Whenever we attack another creature, the thing that we're attacking is going to be called the blocker. The target of our attacks is always the blocker. So if our hero was right here and this deep one decided to target this hero, that hero is now the blocker. And the way this is going to work, again, just to keep this nice and succinct, this creature rolls 3 attack dice. I'm going to roll the 3 attack dice, and if the total amount of dots is equal to or greater than the stat that's being attacked, and if it doesn't specify its arcane, it's always physical. If it specifies arcane, then we're targeting the target's mind. But if it's equal or greater than the target attribute, that player or that target is going to take 1 point of damage. Of course, when you are hit, understand that when you're hit, if you're a hero, you can spend the essence, like I said earlier, instead of losing the life. That's the important thing to understand, but also understand, this is very important for our heroes, that we don't necessarily need to hit to have the special effect go off. So for example, this hero right here has a 2 stamina, 3 range ability, which allows them to roll 1 attack die. They rolled the 1 attack die, let's say our target needed a 3 or higher to hit. This is not enough to actually hit and do damage, but our special ability of reducing the range of the target by 1 is still going to go into effect. So I'm still going to take my token, put it on the target monster, and its range is going to be decreased by 1. Even though I missed, my special ability still goes off, unless the card specifically says that when destroyed or if hits. Like for example, when this card right here says when this monster hits, roll. So if I rolled the 3 dice right here, and it was too low to cause a hit, nothing's going to go off. I have to actually hit for that special effect to go off. So that's just a little minor thing when it comes to attacking. And of course, might as well cover ethereal units right here, because understand that ethereal units cannot be targeted unless an attack targets ethereal targets. Ethereal units can be attacked indirectly, which means traps can affect them, exploding barrels can attack them, and any ability that does not need to target the ethereal unit can also attack them. In this game, assume ethereal doesn't mean that not fully substantial. It kind of means not able to be seen by your human eyes. So it's a little bit different a way to understand it, but just understand that, for example, this one says it goes ethereal if it's the only one left on the board. When you're ethereal, you can't really be seen by the human eye unless you have an ability that attacks ethereal, or unless you're using an indirect attack, such as traps or exploding barrels. Now, when heroes die, we're going to remove its figure and its card and its markers from the game. We're going to shuffle its inventory and place in the destroyed item deck. We're going to move its binding events from the game. The player becomes a scheming monster, like I said, and if it's the last explorer, they're destroyed and the game is lost. Of course, when monsters die, they're going to die when they're reduced to 0 hit points and they're destroyed. When an explorer destroys a monster or another explorer in play, treat this unit as being killed, even if indirectly, for a pit, for example, or traps, whatever. If a destroyed monster's level is lower than the current monster level on the chapter board, we're going to remove it from the current game. If a monster level matches the current monster level on the chapter board, we're going to place it on top of the destroyed pile. Remember, this is the current level. So if we are at level 3 and we killed this level 1 Ethereal, we're going to remove it from the game. We're not going to shuffle it back into the destroyed pile at all. If a destroyed creature is destroyed during an explorer's turn, that specific explorer gains 1 essence. Do understand that when we use abilities that cause banishment, though, banished monsters are not considered destroyed. You don't gain essence for destroying them, but you do to remove them from the game if they're lower than the monster level. So if we happen to banish this deep one, we're not going to gain any essence for it. Even if this hero managed to banish it on his turn, still removed from the game because it's lower than our current monster level, but we won't gain any essence for doing so. Now, I know this has been an extremely long video, and I know I have not gone into the minutest details that some of these rules do need. Now, I understand there's a wonderful player aid that comes for this game, but I think between this video, the player aid, and my playthrough video, you can understand how to play Machina Arcana. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you enjoyed this video series. If you have any comments or questions, make sure you leave them down in the YouTube comments down below. I will get to them as quickly as I can. You can also feel free to email me off-the-shelf board game reviews. That is otsbgr@gmail.com. I'll do my best to get back to your email as quickly as possible. If you enjoy the content, you enjoy the videos I put out there, think about supporting the channel over on Patreon. Patreon.com/otsbgr. Seriously, just toss $1 in the tip jar. I don't do any gimmicks. I don't do any funky games. This channel is 100% sponsor free, which means everything here is from my own pocketbook. Tossing $1 is a wonderful way to say thank you and a wonderful way to help me cover my costs. Enjoy this video. If you enjoy this video series, click that like button, click that subscribe button, and as always, thanks for watching.